Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Esri GeoDev webinar series. About 3 years ago, we started this series as a way to continue engaging in developer-related topics and discussions in between dev summits. Speaking of which, we have our next developer summit coming up March 9th through 11th. We have a lot of new topics, advanced features, and additional functionality to share with you over the coming months. So be sure to stay connected with us through our GeoDev webinar series page on go.esri.com/geodev or any of our social media accounts at Esri GeoDev. We would love to have conversations like these taking place throughout the year so that when we do meet at one of these Dev Summit conferences, it will be as though we never stopped. We hope you get as much or more out of this webinar than you anticipated. Now we'd like to introduce you to today's webinar, Beyond Checking the Boxes, a guide to ArcGIS Online Security and Privacy. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Use Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce you to one of our presenters, Randall Williams. Randall, let's get started, shall we?
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our presentation today. As Amy mentioned, this presentation is titled Beyond Checking the Boxes, a Guide to ArcGIS Online Security and Privacy. My name is Randall Williams. I'll be joined today by Gregory Brown, who is also on my team, and we are both members of Esri Software Security and Privacy team. So just as members of a quick introduction, again, I'm Randall. Greg will be joining us here later. I want to make sure that everybody knows that this presentation and the materials that we'll be discussing will be available both on https://trust.arcgis.com, and that again, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Go site from that Amy mentioned previously. And finally, we'll summarize at the end with the list of the resources so that during the course of the Q&A, you'll be able to either take a screenshot or notate the location of some of the resources that we're going to be discussing today. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and plow into this presentation here. So I like to start these kinds of presentations when I deliver them with a quick pop quiz to kind of break the ice for us all. And I handle a lot of various different ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS enterprise security related issues in part of my role in Esri's product security incident response team. And this is a frequently asked question here, a frequently asked issue, that is. What is the most common security issue reported by users of ArcGIS Online? Is it like a denial of service type of thing where users can't reach the services that you've published or information is otherwise unavailable for some reason? Maybe it's related to an information leak or a spill where there's some sort of unintended sharing of proprietary or private information that shouldn't have been shared in the first place. Or maybe it's like I'm calling here misinformation propagation. That's just a fancy way of saying fake news, wherein somebody publishes some information up to ArcGIS Online, and that information is either intentionally or unintentionally correct, and maybe using the platform to try to influence opinion in some way, shape, or form there. Or finally, kind of a classic type of issue that people might think of in general, and that's a hacked account there. And so in thinking about this, from my perspective and for what I deal with, the most common security issue that folks report in ArcGIS Online is in fact related to information leaks and spills, where members of an organization unintentionally share information that they shouldn't otherwise be sharing there. So with that in mind, let's jump into a little bit of extra credit. How do you think ArcGIS Online organization leaks and spills tend to occur? It could potentially be related to the configuration of the organization itself, like the security and sharing options that we have in the Home app there, and in the My Organization tab. Is it related to the individual item configuration for items and services and things like that you share to ArcGIS Online? Could it be related to account sharing practices, where maybe folks are sharing accounts between each other, or providing each other usernames and passwords and that kind of thing? Or finally, maybe it's just a general lack of governance and oversight, where peers and managers aren't taking the opportunity to review processes and review your items, users, and content there in ArcGIS Online. So when we think about those kind of options there, it's really a trick question, because the answer really is all of the above contribute to information leaks and spills to ArcGIS Online. So with that in mind, what can we do about this? That's the entire point of this conversation that we're having today. Today we're going to discuss some ArcGIS Online configuration options and best practices that we can leverage to help prevent these types of issues. We're going to discuss some processes and pipelines to help inform information delivery. That's just basically another fancy way of saying introducing some level of governance into your organization in terms of ArcGIS Online sharing. And that can help to prevent the spread of fake news at the same time. We're also going to discuss a couple of tools that we have to help monitor the security and sharing posture of your ArcGIS Online orgs and items. So we've actually built up a couple of tools in our team that can help us along this journey and help us figure out where we sit in terms of our security and privacy posture for our ArcGIS Online organizations. So first off, jumping headfirst into ArcGIS Online configuration options and best practices. I tend to speak at a lot of different conferences, whether it's user conference or dev summit or whatever local conferences might be going on, and our users appreciate the level of documentation that we have, but it's broad and vast. There's a lot of different configuration options that we document in various places within our ArcGIS Online documentation there. And folks kind of ask me, hey, is there a cheat sheet or a set of best practices that I can easily refer to for configuring my ArcGIS Online organization to be more secure and private? And in fact, yes, there is. We do have a security and privacy best practices cheat sheet. At the end of this conversation, I'll be providing you with a link to this document. This particular version that we have was built off of the 10.7.1 base enterprise deployment and what we call ArcGIS Online 8.3, which is a little bit dated back, but we'll be updating this for 10.8.1/10.9 and for the December release of ArcGIS Online. So we'll be providing a newer version of that here shortly. Before we jump into these settings, and we're not going to go granularly into each one of those. I'm not going to drone on into all of these for you, so we can all let out a collective cheer. I do want to provide a level of context here for a document like this. So this is a security-related presentation. So we're offering options and best practices for organizations that are security and privacy minded. That doesn't necessarily apply to every single ArcGIS Online organization that's out there. The context that I need to provide here is that these options you may want to pick and choose kind of a la carte as far as which ones are right for your organization. Some organizations' missions is to share everything. They know that they don't have any personally identifiable information or personal health information or trademarked information or anything like that in their organization. And they're happy to give a carte blanche to users for all of the information that they published out there. Other organizations may be doing some collecting of surveys that may include some level of sensitive data, or they may have be commercial organizations that have trade secrets that they don't necessarily want to share across a wider audience. And this spreadsheet is really geared towards those organizations that are looking to improve their posture in terms of security and privacy here. So with that in mind, we do kind of split these up into various subtopics here and various recommended options. We also go into whether or not those options are provided by Esri in both the ArcGIS Online configuration or the ArcGIS Enterprise base enterprise deployment. So we say, hey, are these options something that's provided by Esri? Or are they something that's going to be user configurable and user provided? Basically, who's bringing these options to the table here? Are these options enabled by default, or are they options that we need to configure? Now remember, ArcGIS Online is a multi-tenant solution, and it's geared towards a lot of different industries out there and a lot of different folks. So we need to consider here whether or not these options are going to be right for your organization, and whether or not you want to enable these options or not. And finally, we have a validation tool that's available for both of these options. In Enterprise, it's ServerScan.py and PortalScan.py. And in ArcGIS Online, it's going to be the ArcGIS Security Advisor. And that's a tool that Greg will be highlighting here later on during the course of this conversation. Lastly, here we describe the criticality or impact of these various issues in terms of both security and privacy, because there is a difference between the two of those. So we tried to color coordinate these items out to folks to make sure that they understand the options that are available to us. So moving forward, let's have a look at just a few of these configuration options. The first one that I've highlighted here revolves around using organization-specific logins, and that might not be a term that's familiar with everybody on this call, because for a while there, these types of logins, whether they're OpenID Connect or SAML type logins, were described as enterprise logins, and they're kind of used for centralized user management here. And like I just mentioned, we support both SAML and OpenID Connect. And these technologies help us manage users at a centralized resource. Now, why would I bring this up this early in the conversation? And the answer is because in a lot of organizations, what might happen is that the IT department is given a notice that an employee no longer works at the company in question. But do the ArcGIS Online administrators get that same notice? And so if you're not using enterprise logins and you're using the built-in logins, you may not be aware that those users are no longer with your organization. And depending upon the relationship that they had with your organization and how they came to be separated from the company for whatever reason, you may be exposing yourself to potential issues related to vandalism or items being deleted or items being changed or whatever you could imagine happening by someone who should not necessarily have access to your org, gaining access to the org. So when you're working with a technology like SAML or OpenID Connect here, if we're disabling a user at this centralized location at the domain level, then that means that they'll also be disabled at the ArcGIS Online level at the same time, because the SAML assertion that's sent between the client application and ArcGIS Online and your domain will be denied at the domain level, so they never get in the door there. It's also handy for administering groups because ArcGIS Online supports working with enterprise groups there. So it's just an easier way to, in general, be able to administer your organization without having to duplicate the administration efforts associated with user management there. We do recognize that a lot of organizations currently leverage organization-specific logins within their organization and also leverage built-in logins for contractors, for instance, or for others that aren't necessarily employed by the organization but still need access to some of the information that's in ArcGIS Online. And we'll be discussing some strategies to manage that later on whenever we discuss some governance types of use cases there. The next thing that I'd like to discuss here is an option that's not very well adopted, and to be honest with you, a lot of people just don't like it because it's kind of frustrating to have to bring out your phone and do a second layer of authentication for working with ArcGIS Online or any other provider, whether it's Facebook or your bank or your doctor, if your doctor provides some sort of online service there, and that's multi-factor authentication. At least in terms of ArcGIS Online, multi-factor authentication is currently the single best way to prevent unauthorized users access to accounts there. The next point that I'm making here is that it's key for non-repudiation. And what I mean by that is that if you're allowing your users to share accounts, and or if an account is breached in some way, shape, or form, and I log in as someone who I'm not identified by in the system, like say my name is Randall, but I log in as Greg, then all of the actions that I take in that organization are going to be taken under the context of, for instance, Greg. And so what that means is that whenever it comes down to reviewing your logs and understanding who did what when in your organization, that's basically performing some level of auditing. That auditing kind of goes out the window because I can't prove that I am who I say I am. I may be, in fact, Greg or Jill or Amy or Sue or whoever it might be, all logging in under the context of someone that isn't supposed to be logging in under that account there. This comes into play a lot of times, especially if you're in a dispute of some sort where you're trying to determine uh, during the course of an audit who shared what information when and how far it got and those kinds of items there. It makes it very challenging for Esri to help customers in these types of situations because there's a lack of concept of non-repudiation because accounts were shared. So again, multi-factor authentication really helps to deal with that. A, it helps to keep your account secure, and B, it helps in the auditing process whenever you're working with ArcGIS Online. So next here, configuration options here. Separation of duties is an important concept that folks need to understand. I know for a fact that a lot of folks, especially folks with smaller ArcGIS Online organizations, tend to log in every day, all day long, under an account that has full admin access to to an ArcGIS Online organization. I see it every day. I'm guilty of the same thing myself in my own little ArcGIS Online development organization that I maintain there. That's not really the best practice, though. There's an idea of the concept of least privilege here that folks need to speak to, and folks who have done a little bit of domain administration understand that. That's in fact one of the first things that we do whenever we're administering a domain is that we have an administrator account. Typically, whenever I used to do domain administration, the first task that I did would be to create another account, assign it admin privileges, and then completely delete the named account called administrator. And then I would go to create sub accounts. Each one of those accounts might belong to a group that itself has different privileges and different options there. But I would attempt to limit myself from logging in as someone with full admin capabilities there because of the separation of duties aspect. And this makes sense for a lot of different reasons. I mean, if you take a step back, is the person who handles the look and feel aspect of your website, like the images and things like that, kind of those sorts of aspects. Does that person really need to be have the ability to manage security and infrastructure operations within your organization? I'd argue probably not. Does the person who is in charge of making sure that folks are granted licenses as they need them for ArcGIS Pro? Do they necessarily need to have access to be able to change people's roles and update and delete passwords and things like that within your organization? Probably not. So the idea is to be able to create these types of custom roles and delegate privileges to these roles so that users can take on specialized tasks instead of using full administrative access to ArcGIS Online. And that can help you prevent you from accidentally shooting yourself in the foot if you make some change absent-mindedly that kind of cascades down and results in some sort of organizational permissions drift or configuration change or stuff like that. So again, consider your use case and adjust accordingly. But for larger organizations where tasks like this are delegated about, consider not using full admin to do that and instead use custom roles. Finally, and again, we're talking in the context of organizations that are looking more towards working with uh, uh, working with content that doesn't necessarily need to be public, or where there's privacy and security considerations here. Consider disabling anonymous access to your organization's website, and then instead granting anonymous access on a per item basis. And again, it depends upon your use case there. If you're and how vested you are in encouraging people to be able to discover the content that you have in your organization. But preventing anonymous access, again, can help to prevent discovering information that's in your ArcGIS Online organization that you may not intend immediately to share out there. And our last configuration option here is disabling the ability for members to share content publicly. So when I talk to organizations, which this really happens about once a month or so, organizations will contact me and they say, we had an accidental breach. We had some information with some private details of some of our constituents, say for instance, a state and local government. And an intern came in or something like that, and shared some information that had attributes that they didn't fully vet out and realize the importance of what it was that they were sharing. And they might come to me with the intention of looking to know how many unique IPs may have visited and accessed that information. And that sort of detail really helps them to scope the response. And with the response, what that typically means is printing out a whole bunch of letters, depending upon the scope of the breach, and sending them out to potentially everyone that's in that data set that got shared. And if you're talking about a data set reflecting 150,000 records, that could potentially be 150,000 different letters, each with its own postage rate. And then on top of that, the potential of the media catching hold of that, and then asking potentially uncomfortable questions of your organization about how this kind of thing could happen. And it does happen. And the internet, as we all know, the information that is shared on the internet tends to sprout legs and run around all over the place. And it's really difficult to put the cat back in the bag once this type of information is shared out from any type of website, whether it's ArcGIS Online or anybody else. So as a fail-safe there, consider disabling the ability for members to share publicly unless and until you are able to put together some of the governance processes that we're going to be discussing here shortly during the course of this conversation. Our next topic here is really just about disabling the ability for members to edit some of the biographical information and who can see your profile. This type of option helps to protect your members' privacy, and again, from sharing information not just for in the data sets that you're sharing, but also in their own user profiles, where they're identifying themselves personally as members of your organization. And again, this kind of depends upon your use case. Some organizations are very public, and all of your publishers are named in your bios, and you want to have that bio information out there, that biographical information out there, because that helps to add credence to the information. And it's important for users to be able to understand who it is who creates the information and provides it, so they can make a decision about whether that information is trustworthy. I would argue that there's room for a happy degree in the middle there, where maybe on a per user basis, you set some profiles for those folks and allow those folks to set those profiles to public prior to hitting the button to allow members to edit that information and to share who can see their profiles there, and do that for maybe some of your public figures who are known entities anyway, as opposed to excuse me, some of the other members of your organization there. So I hope that makes sense as far as some of the highlighted options that's in the cheat sheet that we discussed earlier there, as far as just some options that can really help to protect your organization and yourselves and your constituents, and whoever's represented in your data sets, from improper sharing on ArcGIS Online. The next topic that we're going to jump into here is regarding governance. I alluded to this topic here a few minutes ago, and I think it's an important but frequently overlooked topic of discussion, because it's not one that we could really cover easily in the technical documentation, because governance isn't really a switch that you flip one way or the other. And the reason why governance is important here is because technical controls are really only part of the solution here. I'd really encourage organizations to get together and sit around the table and come up with some processes and procedures to augment some of the technical controls that you've implemented in your organization, to help solidify some of these things, prevent configuration drift, and to kind of vet out these types of information that you share prior to jumping down that hole. It's just a little bit of what did they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's really what we're talking about here in developing processes and procedures to help organizations with understanding what it is that they're doing when they're doing it. So the first process that I'd strongly recommend is a content and sharing review policy. I would say that prior to releasing content publicly, if leadership and constituents and creators get together and collaborate around a table and review, it's just some basic attributes of the information that you're working with. Does, like, for instance, does the resource that you want to share, does it contain any personally identifiable information? That's PII. PHI, which is personal health information, or does it contain any proprietary information or anything like that, like trade secrets? That's certainly happened before, where contractors get a hold of a data set and share it out to ArcGIS Online, and don't really understand the context of what it is that they're doing whenever they hit the share all button. And then the owner of the data set calls me up and says, hey, I found my trade secret data out there in ArcGIS Online. I don't understand how it got there. Can you help me to understand how this information got shared from your solution? And inevitably, it comes down to someone that they've already had a prior business relationship, who had access to that type of information there, sharing it out on ArcGIS Online, intentionally or not. But then it turns into a source of conflict between those people there. So again, having some sort of insight into that is important prior to going public with this level of information. Hand in hand, does your organization have rights or permission to publish this information? We do, Esri does have a process in place to help with copyright disputes. That's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. If you Google us, Esri DMCA, we do have a DMCA form and a procedure for folks who have a dispute about content, that if their content is shared on ArcGIS Online without their knowledge. That happens a lot with students who will take screenshots or images that don't belong to them, or even copy full text out of a website as part of a project, and they put it into a story map or something like that. And then the project is over, they graduate from high school, but their schools, it still has that information, that organization up, and then eventually someone does a Google search and they find their own words out there on the internet. And so we have to work with those organizations and kind of arbitrate the takedown for that kind of thing if it's required. Another important aspect here is regarding editing. A very powerful feature in ArcGIS Online feature services is the ability to edit those features. And again, depending upon your organization's needs, that may or may not include crowdsourced type of activities there. That's where the idea of hosted feature service views comes in, and we actually have a document on the ArcGIS Trust Center. Again, that's trust.arcgis.com. In the document section there, we actually have a document that describes workflows with Survey 123, for instance, for keeping your survey results private, if that's your mission, at least to the point to where you can do some QA and QC, some quality control and quality assurance against the information that's being added into those surveys, to help prevent potential vandalism if you're allowing people to draw features, or the spread potentially of fake news if people are creating features for issues that don't exist. You can imagine what might happen if you have a publicly available feature service where you're collecting information about fire hazards, and someone maliciously starts making up locations where fires are that haven't necessarily been validated and verified. You can potentially cause panic and things like that. And what editing is required, and who editing is allowed, who's allowed to do editing is important. Finally, is the content that you're sharing, has it been vetted and considered to be authoritative? That's an important concept to understand. And we have a slide later on that describes a tool that we have that can help your organization describe itself to everyone else as being authoritative and as the source of truth. And that's very, very important these days, as everyone likely understands. There's a lot of different issues around related to whether or not an organization is trustworthy and is the source of truth. One last topic that I want to bring up here in terms of these types of processes for sharing and review. So ArcGIS Online, as I mentioned earlier, we're FedRAMP tailored low software as a service accredited, which means that we're a federally approved cloud service provider, and we go through rigorous controls and yearly auditing to maintain that certification there. Is FedRAMP tailored low going to be appropriate and enough assurance for your specific organization and for the data that you want to share? Is the information that you really intend to share, are you including PHI and PII, where people are personally identifiable in some of that that data there? If you are, you might want to consider consulting with your legal team to understand whether or not that accreditation, that current accreditation that we have, is enough assurance for your organization for the type of information that you want to share. That's particularly important in the context of HIPAA and other privacy laws that focus on those types of things. So just something to consider there. Another process that speaks to one of the technical controls that we were talking about earlier when we mentioned organization-specific logins. This is where it comes into with your default built-in logins for ArcGIS Online, and that's an account review policy. And that's the idea here is to, once a month or so, breeze through your accounts there, review the roles that they belong to, review the permissions that they have, and make sure that there hasn't been any kind of configuration drift or anything like that that's happened with your users in your organization. It's especially important if you have multiple administrators, or if you have custom roles where you're able to someone's able to pick and choose the roles that users are able to assume there. And this helps to eliminate issues like privilege creep, excessive privileges, access misuse, where again, if someone is removed from the organization for whatever reason, but that notification doesn't make it to the ArcGIS Online organization, having that kind of review might help to prevent any kind of misuse there, and it eliminates some kinds of insider threats. And another thing that this account review, when coupled with content review, is you might be able to uncover some stale content, maybe from initiatives that are no longer active there. And depending upon the nature of the data that you've got, like if you've got a whole lot of image attachments or hosted tiles or anything like that in ArcGIS Online, can potentially save you some credits for hosting charges for storage and things like that. So consider that. Now we're jumping into the tools here, and I'm going to let Greg discuss some really awesome tools that we have here in just a second. But I think that this is a really important and underutilized tool that Esri offers for ArcGIS Online, and that's the Esri Organization Verification Program. And I've got a link to this at the end of this of this conversation here. But what that allows you to do is that Esri will validate that essentially your organization is who they claim to be. we will help to change the perception of your ArcGIS Online organization, not just as a system of record, but also as a source of truth here, for you to establish the authoritative status of the items that you publish here. So I've highlighted some important phrases out of the documentation for what exactly an Esri verified organization is. And when you become an Esri verified organization there, we will place an authoritative badge on your ArcGIS Online organization page, and items that you mark as authoritative will then also have this badge that we've highlighted here in this other graphic that indicates that this is authoritative content. And as an extra special bonus, when you identify content as authoritative, that gets a search engine optimization boost within ArcGIS Online. So when folks search for content, your content appears at the top of the list because it is authoritative, as opposed to other potentially non-authoritative content. So you can see how this type of program can really help to prevent the spread of fake news, and that because organizations, again, ArcGIS Online is a multi-tenant solution. And it's not particularly difficult for someone to create a CSV, for instance, of information that's out there, and then publish it up to ArcGIS Online and make claims that it is authoritative and truthful. So you can help to combat that by identifying yourself absolutely as a source of truth here. That's an important concept these days as we're moving forward. So that's a lot of stuff. How do you keep track of all that? How do you know where we stand? So I'm going to turn the conversation over to my colleague, Greg Brown, and he's going to talk a little bit about the ArcGIS Security Advisor and how that's used to monitor your organization. Greg?
Thank you, Randall. So our journey begins with going to the ArcGIS Trust Center by typing in https://trust.arcgis.com. This is going to be your go-to place for security and privacy information, as well as being able to launch the Security Advisor. By clicking the link above, it's going to go to the landing page. On the landing page, we see that this is offered by the group or the team that Randall and I are part of, the software security and privacy team. We offer two ways of logging in: directly to ArcGIS Online, which is the focus of this, as well as to ArcGIS Enterprise, so you could check your on-prem solutions. One thing that I like to highlight is item 3, is that by clicking on the version number, it'll bring up release notes, so you can see what changes occurred between the different version numbers. And then the footer has links going back to the Trust Center and privacy and legal information. So now, what does this application do? The purpose, or the way this application came about, was to help give a better visual and security guidance to the settings that your ArcGIS Online organization had. If you remember from the previous slides, you would see some text and you would see a slider to turn it on and off. This started off to help give a better understanding as to, well, what would happen if those were turned or selected either on or off. It's evolved and grown into helping with providing insight as to how items are set, as well as going into log activities so that you can look into your organization or member log. The layout, if we see it, the number 1 position, just helps you see the account that's logged in as well as the organization. And we got our sign out. As we go to number 2, this we call the blade navigation, and represents the modules that are currently provided by this tool for you to use. By clicking the blade and selecting it, it's going to then in number 3 show the module that is currently active that you can go ahead and work with. Help is also provided in 2 areas. One, we see an A is under the blade module area. When you click on this, this will bring up the overall help and show everything, help for all the modules aggregated together. If we look into the right where we have the selected module, there's also going to be a help that's specifically focused on that particular module. For our discussion today, we're going to be focusing on the modules, the Setting Advisor, the HTTP check, the public FS edit check, and feedback. So now the first module, the Settings Advisor. So as I mentioned, this is what started it all. And the idea was that it would go connect to your organization, scan your settings, and put it against a policy and give a little bit more insight as to what did it mean to, or what does it mean to have a setting enabled versus disabled. And so to accomplish that, it uses icons and colors. We have in there a hierarchy of danger, warning, success info. If you remember, there was a previous cheat sheet that Randall showed that had the colors. The idea is they're in sync. And when you go to this, it's going to take all of the setting information, those results, and aggregate it up. Where we see on the screen item A, it's going to show at the top if there is something that you do need to look at. And so in this particular case, it is saying, yes, there's a critical item, and that item happens to be the multi-factor authentication. As we look at this area for our review, we see that it's broken up into 3 areas. Number 1, it's a description of what this item is. Number 2, it's discussing or helping us understand, is it turned on or off? And number 3, providing some guidance. And as we look at the guidance for this, at the last item there, we do recommend all administrators should have MFA turned on. And so for our second module, we'll be going into the HTTP check. So this module came about to help with the ArcGIS Online HTTP only, or the HTTPS only enforcement that will be going on December 8th this year. And the idea is it will scan your items, it will look to see if there's any references of HTTP and show them so that you can correct them. The idea is that it would provide links so that you could, if it's a map, a web map, you could, excuse me, yeah, a web map, you could go directly to the the layer and update it, or you could use an editor that we just added in on the last version. If it's a story map or a dashboard, we would also provide a link going back to the designer itself so that you can make changes there. One thing we always want to highlight is always back up your data, and there is a couple of links there. The third module we're going to talk about then is the public FS edit check. And this came about just to highlight, as we talked about settings and making sure that you have an understanding if there is a feature layer that is publicly available and editable. So this will only show public editable feature services. It provides a link back to the settings so that you can make adjustments so that you could, if you realize this is something that should not be editable, you could disable it there. And lastly, how to provide feedback. So the advisor, there is on the navigation pane where we have the blades, feedback. If you have any suggestions, provide us feedback. Click on that and send us an email and let us know your thoughts about the tool as well as how you feel we can improve it. With that, back to Randall. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. So Greg worked really hard on this tool, and it's proven its worth again and again and again. We are highly responsive to the feedback that we get, and we are listening to customers' questions, and we do frequently respond back in the same day, if not the next day, to help guide customers in this respect. I want to point out that on the in the Documents tab in the ArcGIS Trust Center, there again it's HTTPS trust.arcgis.com. We do have a 32-minute presentation there that discusses specifically the ArcGIS Online HTTPS change that's coming up on December 8th, and it describes how you can prepare for it. And there's a demo there and how you can use the ArcGIS Security Advisor to go through and make any necessary changes that you might need to make in order to prepare your various ArcGIS Online items there. And if folks have questions about that, we do have a lot of KB articles out there about that changeover. Support is very well, Esri Support Services is very well versed in how that's going to go down and what that's going to look like. And we do field questions on our team as well. So if you need to reach out to us and ask those types of questions, we're happy to provide insight into what that might mean. Most organizations have already made the switch over to HTTPS only. If you haven't, if your ArcGIS Online organization has not yet flipped that switch, I'd at least encourage making that happen, at least temporarily. You can always switch it back, at least until December 8th, and just validate some of your items out there and make sure that they're going to continue to work the way that they're expected to work when HTTPS only is enforced in your organization. I would consider doing that sooner rather than later. And again, we do have some pointers that we can offer you both on the ArcGIS Trust site, or if your questions aren't answered with supports documentation or in the video, we're happy to discuss with you one way or the other. Just let us know and be aware that that change is going to happen on December 8th of this year there. So finally, as a summary here, we went over some technical controls here that we can work through, including the security and privacy cheat sheet. Went into detail on some of the highlighted options that we have there that we hope that folks consider. We discussed a lot of things that might be new to some folks there, including policy controls and introducing some level of governance there for the content that you share, how you go about sharing it, whether it's going to be public content or non-public content, and reviewing your organization membership for configuration drift and permission drift and other subjects like that. And finally, Greg discussed the ArcGIS Security Advisor, which is a great tool for validating and continuing to validate your configuration for your ArcGIS Online organization and making sure that it meets the standards that you set. And the Esri ArcGIS Online organization verification option that allows you to define and name yourself as an authoritative organization so that folks know that the content that you provide is trustworthy and that your organization is a source of truth here. So finally, I did promise you a bunch of links and details and things like that that's kind of crammed into this page for you here. We'll leave this up during the course of the Q&A, but I wanted folks to be able to access this sort of information, maybe take a screenshot or a picture or write them down or carve them into a stone, whatever needs to happen. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and close out and let Amy take over for a minute and take some questions from you folks.
Thank you, Randall. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. We've received quite a few, and we will try to get through as many as possible, but whatever we do not get to today, we will address in a GeoNet blog post after this webinar. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question is, if we enable the enforce HTTPS setting in ArcGIS Online and determine that doing so breaks apps or maps, will disabling this temporarily while we fix the affected apps return the apps to their functioning state?
Yes. So the option to enable HTTPS can be reverted back to HTTP for 30 days after you make that setting. Now, so a caveat, that was true 30 days ago, but December 8th is coming up quicker than 30 days. So it's so your time that you have is whatever the I'm struggling to do the math on the fly on my head. I'm sorry. I'm not that bright. but you would have until the December 8th changeover to switch it back to HTTP. So what I would recommend doing for organizations is to make the switch, schedule a time, make the switch. ArcGIS Online has a new option that allows you to set an organization banner. I think that it's going to be a handy option for customers to define a banner and say, hey, we're doing some testing on HTTPS. There may be some service interruptions. Please let us know if you encounter any kind of difficulties. And set that option using that banner, and then flip the switch. And then what I personally would do would be to reach out to all of my members of my organization and have them test their own content. It can be overwhelming for an administrator to attempt to update everybody's content. So the Security Advisor actually has a cool tool in it that will allow folks to, you probably saw that edit option in the Security Advisor, where folks can go and update their item details on the fly. There's also a button in there that will help you update all of those HTTP references in one magic button kind of operation there. There's a caveat that you have to know. So if your content is referenced on ArcGIS Online, if it's published to there, you're going to be good to go, because everything that's published on ArcGIS Online currently supports both HTTP and HTTPS, at least until December 8th. The question here is whether or not the links to external sources themselves support HTTPS. So you may want to validate in the case that you have older servers or maybe some OGC resources out there, you're connecting to some college's website or something like that, where they may not have implemented HTTPS in their own servers out there. So you might want to validate that those services and those resources that you're accessing are themselves accessible via HTTPS prior to making those changes over. It's also important to note that that we are enforcing HTTPS on the ArcGIS Online domain. So any resources that you open that open in a separate browser tab, maybe images from pop-ups and things like that, if they open in a different session, those are unlikely and are on a different domain. Those are unlikely to be affected by the ArcGIS Online HTTPS configuration change, because we're not enforcing HTTPS for all of the resources that you might potentially link to. But with that said, it's a good idea to go ahead and update those as much as you can, simply because your browser may throw mixed content error messages and things like that for any kind of items that show up inline in your like in pop-ups or something like that, where you might have images in there. So so it's a good idea to certainly go through and validate that. I hope that answers the question.
All right, we got a lot of questions coming in, so we're trying to get through these as quickly as possible. Second question, do you have the ability to have dual party approval for access requests? For example, both Joe and Fred must be okay before Sue can perform that task.
We do not, but that's an enhancement that I can take into consideration. If Amy, if we can get in contact with whoever it is that that asked that type of question there, I'd be interested in understanding the scope, and we can follow up offline.
That's fine. Yeah, we'll do that. Can we have both MFA and non-MFA for the same organization site, so that for some sensitive apps and data we can force MFA, but for other apps and data they can be treated as non-MFA?
We have it on a per user basis, but we don't have it on a per app basis, because MFA really is a user specific control instead of a content specific control.
All right. I'm an admin in my ArcGIS Online organization. I like the idea of not using full admin access on a daily basis, but if I create an account with a non-admin role to use, that will need another named user account. When using centralized enterprise login, each user can only have one account. I want to be able to have one login, but log in as a different non-admin role. Can I do that?
So the question basically is sort of a pseudo option. So in Linux, we have the ability as a non-admin user to enter a command like sudo, which then elevates their privileges remotely, or a role change type of thing. I think that's another enhancement that I'd like to follow up with this requester on, and scope that out and understand it. That's not an option that we currently have, but I like that option as an idea.
All right, great. Can you clarify the security concern with disabling anonymous access to the ArcGIS Online organization? For example, we see encouragement from Esri on setting up an org homepage and so on. Also, we've been told in order to see desired behavior in our org that we enable anonymous access. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would, so it's highly contextual, really, and it honestly depends upon your organization's mission. It may be that your organization's mission is intrinsically requires an anonymous access to be available in your ArcGIS Online organization. I would argue that if I was for instance, a developer and I was working with a customer's data set in order to build a custom application that consumed that data set, I would probably not want to have anonymous access enabled in my organization just to prevent any kind of information leaks, which do and certainly have happened. I dealt with that literal situation here last week. So it really kind of depends upon your use case and your organization. I don't know that there's necessarily a technical answer to that. The goal here is really to bring up some potential considerations that customers might want to work with, and not necessarily to say that these are going to be blanket best practices for every ArcGIS Online organization. It really kind of depends upon your use case for your individual organization.
All right.
If you'd like, we can also continue that conversation on GeoNet. I think that's a good one to bring up.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can definitely do that. We had an urgent question that came through. I'm not really sure. Maybe you might be able to answer it, but we must enable ArcGIS Online before 12/8 if we cannot get to it. Does that make sense?
I don't understand the context,
Okay.
but I'd be happy
Yeah.
to have a
Okay.
direct conversation with her. You don't, to be clear, a customer themselves doesn't necessarily have to do anything in ArcGIS Online to enable HTTPS only. It's going to happen. It's going to happen for everybody in one fell swoop on December 8th. We're letting everyone know ahead of time and have been letting everyone know for the past year or so that organizations have time to prepare for this changeover.
All right. You mentioned giving individual services anonymous access rather than the whole site. Is that the same as, quote, everyone sharing setting?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. What are some risks with allowing anonymous access to content in an ArcGIS Online organization?
Well, it's again, it depends upon the nature of the content that you're intending to share and your organization's mission there. So, I mean, yeah, you're going to want to limit your audience for some information there, and maybe not limit your audience for other information types and data schemas that you might want to offer. For instance, obviously, if you've got data sets that have people's private information, anything that identifies them personally, which is basically a name and one other piece of information that can help to identify someone in a crowd. That's really what PII really means. Basically, it's two or more pieces of information that can be used to identify one specific individual out of a crowd there. So, if you've got information related to that, you might want to consider making that to be private. Now that's PII is a slippery slope in terms of understanding it, and again, that's a long conversation that we have pretty frequently out there on GeoNet that I think we can entertain. But there's a concept of public PII, which is basically what you would find on your business card, and things like that. So it really, it's contextual and it's highly gray area there as far as that goes. But the potential risks a lot of times are associated with again, proprietary information that's available and your competitors get access to it, or organization risks, especially in groups in California and in Europe and other places that are considering privacy acts like CCPA and GDPR. That where organizations, depending upon the nature of the information that's shared, can be liable for up to 4% of their annual revenue. And for an organization like Esri, 4% of our annual revenue would probably represent our profit for an entire year. So that's a substantial amount of money to worry about there. So I mean, it's and we have a global audience for these types of webinars here. So it's important for me to kind of clarify and explain why we might not want to enable anonymous access for content like that. But again, it's contextual and it kind of depends on the type of information that you're sharing.
Okay, we have a couple more questions that we'll try to get through before the end of the webinar. We are an organization that shares content publicly. We don't want individual users to be the owner of content shared publicly. We have multiple departments that can share publicly, so we have a single built-in account for that owner. How can we incorporate MFA into that type of system?
So the idea would be a shared account. Now I've got a long-winded answer that I think I'd like to take up with whoever asked that individually. For some initiatives that I'm personally working on, the idea of almost a service account that represents a number of different users, kind of an umbrella account that is a representative of each users, where you're kind of labeled. Each one of those users might have a label that is a unified, like Randall's widgets, but underneath Randall's widgets, I might have 5 different employees that each represent Randall's widget. And that way we can have our cake and eat it too. I can log in as myself using MFA, but then represent myself as a different names, as sort of a shared alias there. So without getting into too much detail, I would like to speak to whoever asked this to make sure that something like that would meet their requirements.
All right, thank you, Randall, Gregory, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Beyond Checking the Boxes, a guide to ArcGIS Online Security and Privacy. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me using my email address and your follow-up email. Once you have left today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. We will be providing a recording of this presentation, which will be available within 7 to 10 business days on the go.esri.com/geodev page where you registered for this webinar. On behalf of Esri and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.